So let's take a look at the first Tyranids of 10th edition, and shine a spotlight on the models and rules for the all-new Termagants. Hello and welcome back to Warspets Tactics, where over the last couple of days we've been talking all things 10th edition, and while we've had a whole bunch of interesting things for new rules and shake-ups to the game, it does indeed look like the bugs are going to be getting some serious love in the launch of 10th edition, a pretty huge release akin to what Necrons got in 9th. The first model that the Tyranids have received is this brand new shiny Termagant, perhaps one of the models that I was most expected them to get updated if they got a range refresh. The old kit had certainly stood the test of time, pretty basic but kind of effective enough considering that you'd usually be fielding these guys in enormous great big swarms, but they perhaps were a little bit on the monopose side and definitely had some kind of killer mold line issues. There's a rather nasty one down the centre line of the model and it was in quite a prominent place. In any case, they have certainly been reimagined, likely the first of many new Tyranid kits. The ones that we've seen so far are just the standard gaunts with the flesh borers, though we've had hints of a few more details. And given that they've come out this early in the release, it seems that they're just very likely to be in the 10th edition launch box. My guess would be that they'll probably be in similar sort of numbers to the Necron warriors that we got. We got 20 of those in Indomitus. I wouldn't be too surprised to see 2 squads of 10 of these to really make them feel like the swarm. I guess something like 10 of these or 10 Hormagaunts might also work though. In the previews, Games Workshop also gave us a fair few hints of them in their animations and things. We had them feature in that rather snazzy new 10th edition intro cinematic, plus a pretty nice revolving shot of the model as well, so you can see him properly from every different angle. For the models themselves, I feel like perhaps the most easy way is to compare them like for like with the old Tyranid Termagants. Again, like the reimagined Terminators, I would say that there's more similarities than there are differences here. They haven't had a complete redesign, and they still have the same general aesthetic. Hoofed hind legs and clawed forelegs, plus a flesh borer in the front arms. The armour plates and things are also situated in the same sort of areas. In general though, the miniatures are just a lot more detailed though. Probably not to the point where it's going to be massively harder to paint them, seeing as they still have their very distinctive carapace and fleshy bits. But if you take a closer look at them, they hold up a bit better than the older ones, which definitely come from an earlier era of model making. Otherwise, they feel a bit more like living organisms this time round, rather than being all rather monopose and fairly simplistic. Definitely a fair bit more curved and like they're in motion. The kit's got a few more raised bits on the back of their carapace, and say they're looking a little bit more bipedal than the last ones were. The last ones almost looked like they were walking on 4 legs. These ones seem to be walking a bit more on 2 legs and having the claws free for presumably slashing people. Overall, I think it's a solid update. However, I'd say perhaps my one criticism would be is that they seem to have upsized the base slightly. It looks like they've gone from a 25mm one to a 28mm one. You can tell on the side-by-side comparison. I must admit this does seem a little bit on the annoying side to me. It's so small a change that it almost makes no difference, but it perhaps is enough to make a small rules difference for the amount of gaunts that you can fit in one area of the board. It is quite a big deal on horde units. I don't know if the motivation might be just to have a little bit less overhang on the bases, but that's not exactly changed the most amount, as it looks like they still do. I think for most people it isn't really the biggest issue if you've got a big collection of gaunts. It can just mean though if you're playing in a tournament then usually they expect them to be on the right size bases, so it could be a bit annoying if you happen to be a tournament player who's painted up, say, a huge amount of these Termagants in the past, all of a sudden their bases are on the wrong size. That small gripe aside, in general I think that the models look really nice. Games Workshop have basically soft confirmed a few other things. I believe they did quickly mention that Rippers would still come on the same sprue. Currently the normal kit at the moment comes with 1 Ripper base. I don't know whether it's going to be the same for the new ones. I guess there's just a possibility that they might make like the Necron Warriors and give us a trio of Ripper bases in 1 unit. That would be kind of fun. Perhaps the other major question is the different war gear that the Termagants can get. Currently you can fill them either with Spine Fists, Devourers or Flesh Borers. Perhaps the main question is that when they come out in the launch box, are they going to have all those options on there, or might that be saved for a later plastic kit that has the different choices? The Indomitus Necrons did come with their Gauss Reapers and Gauss Flares, so there's perhaps at least some chance that they'll give them a generous amount of war gear. It would be kind of nice to have the different options in the box. And I guess there's an outside chance they might even be able to make them compatible with Hormagaunts if you gave them some claws or something. My guess would be that probably Hormagaunts will get a different kit though, as they'll probably want to look a little bit more in motion. Another thing that I predict for the kit is that it's probably going to be 10 models rather than 12. Games Workshop do have a whole load of really old classic kits like this one that came in slightly more odd numbers. The general trend for things like Tau Empire Fire Warriors or Kroot Mercenaries and things has been to reset the box size to 10 for the most part. I'd guess that they'd probably do that, plus and minus a few rippers of course. For lightly pricing, again if we're going by the Necron Warriors as slightly more basic Horde infantry, they'd likely be £30, €40 or $50 for 10 of them when they do come out. As these are almost certainly going to be coming out in the launch box though, that should probably mean that you'll be able to get them much cheaper. If it's the same as Necron Warriors and things, you should be able to get them on eBay a fair bit less for people who have bought the entire set and are maybe reselling some spare gaunts. Otherwise, we've got a few more shots of them. There isn't just the one guy unveiled. There's a couple of different head options who have got their tongues out. The feet have got some slightly different poses as well. The one on the left looks like he is walking forward, whereas the other two are stood a bit more static, but in different poses each. And the tails look like they've been sculpted slightly differently as well. A unit that is certainly going to be all the same bug, but not just carbon copies of the same one anymore. On their newsletter, it looks like they do have a picture of a few more of them. Here we've got 5 Termagants with flesh borers. One of them is maybe trying to go for Hive Commander though, as he's found himself a tactical rock to stand on. And otherwise, we've got another couple of pictures more close up. You can see his flesh borer there, really quite a sinister little gun in Warhammer 40K, shooting living ammunition that burrows into its target, and that's probably a very nasty way to go. They have also given us a scale comparison as well, as in this one that you can see that the base looks a little bit different to the standard Termagants. He does look like he stands just a little bit taller as well, particularly with those back spines, and perhaps a slightly more upright posture than the other Gaunt has. At the moment, the Tyranid Termagants are definitely relevant as they're the only unit that we've got a 10th edition datasheet for. I have talked through this in a bit more detail as to the different stats on this, though I wasn't really focusing on the actual Termagant stats at the time, more doing a bit of a general overview. In terms of the actual Termagant stats that we've got, most of these do appear to be relatively similar to the previous one that we've had in 9th. Their durability looks around about the same, with toughness 3, a 5+ save, and 1 wound. We don't really know exactly how leadership is going to work in the new edition yet. I'd guess that leadership 8 probably isn't going to be very good though. Currently they've only got a leadership 5 unless they're actually in synapse range and then become basically fearless. We don't have any listing for troops or battle line on this, but it would appear that that's probably going to be elsewhere in an army construction section of the codexes. I find it unlikely that you wouldn't be able to take the 6 unit selections of these that they promised. And another bit that's missing is the squad size. Currently they're 10 to 30. I guess there's no major reason to think that that would change. Weapons wise, they do actually have a listed melee weapon now, which is basically just a standard attack at strength of 3. Their ranged options have had a few side grades though. The flesh borer remains pretty much as it is now, but has lost a pip of AP. It still is keeping the big strength of 5 though, perhaps surprisingly potent for a basic Tyranid small arm. The Devourer interestingly doesn't have the assault word listed by it. I'd guess it most likely means that you can probably still move and shoot it, but you just wouldn't be able to advance and shoot it. That one gets 2 attacks, hitting on a 4, and its strength is 4 now, which is upgraded from a strength of 3. It really was quite bad in the 9th edition datasheet compared with the flesh borer. Finally, we've got the spine fists, 2 shots at just strength of 3 and only a 12-inch range, though these things have also picked up the pistol and twin links tags. I'd guess the pistol is probably still going to be firing it in melee, even though these things are both assault and pistol apparently. The twin linked is a bit more interesting. I wonder if Games Workshop might be going back to previous editions of the game and allowing a reroll to hit from that. Otherwise, they've got a few interesting keywords such as Endless Multitudes. They've got a faction ability called Synapse, which I suppose would likely be the Tyranid's Fearless equivalent, or probably something along those lines. And then finally they have one of these new datasheet abilities that they've been talking about. This one's an interesting reactive one. If the enemy moves within 9 inches of them, then the unit gets to move d6 inches, provided of course it's not already in engagement range. That sounds really interesting, and it certainly seems like it has potential. We'll get onto that in just a second. First up, I suppose with some stats we could do some very early 10th edition Math Hammer. Obviously a bit speculative at the moment, as we don't know if there's going to be other major things changing, and we don't know the points of these guys. I'd say the spine fists are kind of hard to weigh up, as we don't know what twin linked means. Without that it's a bit meaningless, and I presume that the assault benefit will probably be the same as it is now, allowing you to advance and shoot things, though again that's not really guaranteed. In any case though, barring any other surprises, it would appear that the Devourers might well be the way to go over the Flesh Borers against most targets. If you fire 10 Termagants against a toughness 3, 4 and 5 target, The Devourer averages more wounds on all of them, quite significantly against Toughness 3, and then just a little bit less against Toughness 4 or Toughness 5, and it does kind of imply that they might be the way to go unless we have other factors at play. I have a feeling though that given the numbers seem to be quite so skewed against every target, I feel like we're probably missing at least something. The Devourers might cost an extra point or two, and that might really weigh up the advantages versus the disadvantages. Plus, it's not impossible that without the assault keywords, they might not be able to move and fire without taking the heavy weapon penalty, perhaps. At this point, you can't really assume too much. I would hope that they don't make one of the options just flat better, though. The Flesh Borer does feel a bit more iconic, and if it's on an easy build version of the models, they'll likely get that. Hopefully, it is very usable. Given that the Necron Warriors have been heavily outcompeted with the Gauss Reaper being better, though, it's definitely not guarantees that they get a balance right. Otherwise, though, I feel like the Termagants' reactive movement is perhaps one of the most interesting things about their datasheet so far. On paper, this just seems really powerful, all sorts of shenanigans that you can use an out-of-sequence movement for. I'd say perhaps the single most obvious one would be that if the enemy wants to try and move up and charge them and kill them dead in close combat, you might just be able to back off d6 inches. If you roll high for that, then that could be really quite significant. They could just scoot out of charge range altogether. And then potentially you've just got an opposing unit that just sat there out in the open, thinking that they might have been able to charge down the Termagants and potentially even get out of line of sight or in cover or something. Seems really quite a nice ability for objective holders to have. When the enemy gets near, they get to position themselves in a much better defensive way. Otherwise, I guess you could use it for things like hiding out of line of sight perhaps, jumping to the other side of a ruined wall maybe. It could be that your opponent might have been planning to shoot them and gun them off the objective, and moving too close to them could actually save your skin there. Otherwise, you could potentially try and move block the enemy, perhaps move closer to them so they can't charge a key target from your army that they wanted to, or just use that little bit of extra movement to make sure that you're putting every single model on an objective to weather the storm. That objective control mechanic looks like it's all about putting more points onto an objective. These guys have 2 each as they're a troops equivalent. Again, that does seem very handy to have if you've got a unit that's all about taking the points. Overall, I feel like they're looking like an interesting unit for the Tyranids. Completely impossible to say if they're going to be good or not without any context, but out-of-sequence movement seems like a very powerful thing. I think it is worth mentioning as well that there was another datasheet previewed for them. This one was seen on one of the streams, and it's kind of interesting as it's somewhat similar to the more widely circulated datasheet, but this one has things like some rippers on it, a different set of special rules, slightly different weapons with fewer options just with the Flesh Borer, and also fewer keywords as well. Given that this datasheet actually seems more slimmed down than the other way around, fewer keywords and fewer weapon options for the actual Termagants, my guess is that this one might well be either for their Combat Patrol mini-game mode, or it might even be the one from the launch box when we do eventually get the Tyranids vs Space Marines equivalent of Indomitus. If I had to guess, I might guess that it could be the Combat Patrol box rules. They did say that they'd be trying to balance the different models from the different factions somewhat against each other, and seeing as they wouldn't be able to change out numbers of points or miniatures that you could take, they'll likely have to do that in rules, and that could explain things like, say, having the leadership look like it could be a bit worse on these guys, plus messing around with their unit abilities. Kind of interesting that we've had 2 Termagant datasheets though. Maybe the interesting thing about this one is that you get rippers in the unit and they have to tank damage first, and they also get the benefit of being in cover as well if they're near an objective. That seems like a pretty direct help to what they usually want to do. So anyway, let me know what you make of the new models and their new rules. I think it's going to be a pretty exciting time for Tyranids players getting into 10th edition. Will be fun to see what sort of beasties they get unveiled next. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, where I'll certainly keep the regular 10th edition chatter coming. Loads of stuff to talk about with a new edition of the game in the offing, so feel free to subscribe to the channel if you'd like to see more. If you'd like to see something else Tyranid related, I'll also link my video of the breakdown of their teaser trailer. That's got a whole ton of new Tyranid units, some pretty awesome teasers of plastic kits to come there. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and that's how I can keep on making videos like this just about every single day. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early each week, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with the chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.